Hi, everybody. It is Thursday, October 23rd. Wow, how did we get here? And we are so happy to welcome Jennifer S. Brown, the author of The Whisper Sister. She has another book, and she'll tell you about that too. And we're going to ask her what she's writing next. And she's going to talk to us and then have your questions ready because we'll have some time to ask some questions. And I have already gushed to Jennifer that we really love the book. We
Mhm.
love the time period, and I can't wait to hear more about Minnie and her adventures. Take it
Yep.
away, Jennifer.
All right. You guys can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you guys so much for inviting me. And it's so great to be at a book club that's already read the book, so I don't have to worry about slipping and giving any spoilers away. Because there are a lot of times when I have to be very vague, like there was a tragedy. Um, but I can just, be right out there. So I thought that what I would do is I was going to talk a little about my inspiration for the book and my research and just a couple of fun things that I found. I want to make sure there's lots of time for questions because Vanessa said that you guys definitely have questions, which I am delighted. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a little PowerPoint. If for some reason, Vanessa, you'll let me know if things don't come up right. So everyone
We
can see
can
my
see it.
PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Looks good.
Okay, great. So I don't have, usually this is where I give a summary of the book, but I don't have to do that. So what I was thinking about when I wrote this book was, the 1920s were so exciting. Like all the movies, all the books, everything I've read, it just seemed like so much fun. And my grandfather was a big influence on me. He was the first writer that I know of in the family, and he would give me, books. He introduced me to Sherwood Anderson and the music of the 1920s, Sophie Tucker, and I thought it was all so amazing. And when you look at the 1920s, so glamorous, right? Like you have these speakeasies. This is Luna Park at Coney Island in 1924. I mean, I would have hung out there. Um, and then, of course, you have all the flappers and all the speakeasies. And I just thought this is pretty cool. Um, and this is a view of New York in 1924. And I just thought this is so cool. But then I started thinking, I started thinking, these are the 1920s. My family was there in New York in the 1920s, and I know they weren't living like this. Like, what was life like for them? So, I'd like to introduce you to my family, the Krasnostein family. This is on my father's side. We have here Mishlam and Freda, who became Max and Fanny. They came over in 1906 um, and, brought over lots of their kids with them. Um, this is my grandfather, Nathan Brown. My father had to point him out to me because I have never seen him with hair. So this was like I was like, that's Poppy? But it is. That's Poppy. Um, so this is a later picture. I'm guessing this is in the late 1920s based on when they came and how old my grandfather was. So I was really curious about them and I thought what would life be like for them? So the first thing I did is I went to the census. This is the 1910 census and I looked to see where they live, which is 211 East 10th Street. And I know that my great great grandfather had a newsstand on the southeast corner of 12th Street and 3rd Avenue. Um, and I looked up, so this is obviously not 211, but this is a photo from 1936, just a couple doors down. So just to kind of get an idea of what their apartment looked like. Um, and then I looked at the folks living there. And I was kind of stunned. You have my great grandparents, you have six of their children, one grandchild, and two boarders in that one apartment. And I just thought, they're not going to the Cotton Club, right? They're not doing all of those things that I think are so exciting about the 1920s. They were iron molders. I said Max had a newsstand. Um, my great grandmother Ida, that's my great uncle Morris, who had polio. They weren't she wasn't doing much other than taking care of him in the house. And so this was all just fascinating to me. And I thought, how did they live? That was the inspiration. That's what got me thinking and wondering about what was life in the 1920s for the immigrants, for the Jewish folks, for the folks living at 211 East 10th Street. Um, and this is actually Orchard Street in February 1926. I think it's 1926, might be 20, yeah, 26. This doesn't look like the what I think of when I think of New York, right? This is to me kind of a little not depressing, but it's just kind of bleak, that snow and just the dirt um and those fabulous speakeasies, they weren't all fabulous, right? A lot of the bars were tiny, they were just sort of makeshift. Um and I just who ran these, right? You can read a million things about the Cotton Club. You can't read a million things about the little bitty places in there. So, one of the questions I always get is, what is a whisper sister? And I know that you know from the book what it is, but people are like, where did this term come from? And I will tell you right now, I played with dates, but I found this article. It was syndicated across the country. November 14th, 1926, by Major Walton Green. And he says in here, the female speakeasy proprietor is neither rare nor romantic. She is strictly commonplace and businesslike. She is legion in number, and the hardest thing in the bootleg world is to catch or convict or even to padlock. The lady legger who runs a speakeasy is known in the trade as a whisper sister. So even though this was from 1926 and I hadn't seen it beforehand, I thought, that's the fiction part. And I think that unless I'm telling you that the term wasn't really that used in 1921, 22, you probably wouldn't know. So, but I do like to fess up. So when I read the term, the Whisper Sister, I knew I had to use that. I do love the term Lady Legger. I think that is a fabulous uh, term as well. All right, so I had this idea of a 1920s prohibition, and I'm sure you noticed that it starts on the very first day of prohibition and ends on the very last day. Um, but there was a lot I didn't know, right? I knew I wanted a young woman to be running a speakeasy, like that I knew. A young Jewish woman, I should say. But there was so much I didn't know. So I had to research everything, right? I needed to know about prohibition, Jewish immigration, gangsters, speakeasies. How do you take a baby in the 1920s? I mean, I had two of them. I put on the Pampers and I actually had the Kirkland Costco brand, but um, the my breast milk was kept in the freezer, right? How did they do that? What did the kids study in school? Because of course they're students for much of it. How did they, what did they eat and how did they prepare it, right? The kitchens of those days were not exactly like the kitchens of today. Yiddish curses and 1920 slang. I am at a little bit of to my detriment, I don't speak Yiddish. My grandparents were actually all born in the US. It was my great grandparents who came. And my grandmother, when she was saying something, she would look at us and say, little pitchers have big ears, and they'd switch to Yiddish. But that was the only time I got any Yiddish. What kind of jobs were available, right? Minnie searching for jobs. What could she have gotten? This was a real eye opener for me when I saw how many asked for your religion, where you lived, your nationality, the cost of living. How much did Minnie need to make to support her family? What were the salaries? The subway routes, fashion, jail life, because, I wanted to make the tombs as accurate as I could. The naturalization process obviously plays a very big part in the novel. Feminine hygiene, you know, they didn't have Tampax, so what did they use? And The part where Sylvia tells Minnie to use Lysol. Lysol actually advertised itself as a feminine hygiene product. It was, I mean, it was hilarious looking at it from today. It was horrifying when you think that there were like women who read this who actually thought, yes, I should douche with Lysol. So, not super fun. Restaurants, police, vigorish, the interest you pay to the mob. I had never heard of that before. I started researching this, and my father said, "How could you not know this?" I'm like, "I haven't really dealt with many gangsters." Um, so I started big. I start big. I started with this book, Last Call, Rise and Fall of Prohibition by Daniel Okren. It's a big, thick book. And this gave me my overview of prohibition. Um, and it was sort of my Bible of prohibition. It wasn't specifically Jewish, and it wasn't specifically New York, but it told me how the whole thing worked, how the Volstead Act, came about. I don't know if you know this, but obviously women had the right to vote after prohibition started, but much of the talk about having women voting was that women would vote for prohibition. And that was a big driver in having men vote to have women voting. That was a little convoluted, but um, I watched movies on YouTube. You can find all sorts of movies. And it's so much fun because even though, I can't hear their voice, they were silent films. I could see what they were wearing. I could see some of the mores of the time. Uh, from what was written on the cards, I could get an idea of the language that was used. Um, Bartender's Manual, this is from 1913, pre-prohibition, but I didn't like, what do you need to start a bar? Who knows? Um, Fashions, because Minnie was in the financial situation she was in, she'd probably be shopping at like Orbox, but I knew that whatever was in the Sears Roebuck catalog would be appropriate for her to wear. So the descriptions I came up with clothes came from the Sears Roebuck catalog. And I found them for every year, for every year. Um, this is a declaration of intention. And it was useful for me in having her fill out her forms. I mean, I really had to get down there. Here's my subway map, so I knew what she took to go to the Upper West Side. Now, this is a little hard to see. This is occupations as analyzed by girls. So it talks about, a clerk in a doctor's office deals with patients, instruments, and phone, $10 a week, 8 hours a day. Um, Most agreeable feature, not least agreeable feature, and, remarks. So this was a poll that was taken. It wasn't in New York, but it was of that time period, so I could move it over. How to Become a U.S. Citizen. This is a book I actually bought, and it is this book is the one that Max leaves for Minnie that talks about the Volstead Act, and it is also the one that says if you don't get the country right, you're going to have to start all over again. So that came from this little booklet. And then finally, I have Civics for New Americans. What did they need to know? And these were books I could find the library. Sometimes they were online. It was really my I shouldn't say this. My sister is a professor, so she has access to JSTOR and she'll, let me look up articles. So that was really fascinating for me. All right, so I want to tell you that all the restaurants and speakeasies listed, with the exception of Minnie's, were real. They were ones that actually existed at that time. Um, this book dining in New York was fantastic. Uh, when I first put it in, my copy editor said, "Do you mean Moskowitz and Lubowitz? Because that's the famous restaurant." And I said, "Nope, right here. I'm going to send this to you. This is the original one at 219 Second Avenue at 14th Street." So I was able to be very accurate. And when I talk about, Moskowitz playing the cymbalum, I'm not even sure how you say that. Um, that's really a problem of being a writer is like I know so many words, but I'm afraid to say half of them because I know I'm going to mispronounce them. That all came from here. It's all things that really happened. This was the Good Housekeeping book on the business of housekeeping. So it gave me an idea of how much they would need to earn, right? And it was really a challenge, like that 150 a month, you know, if you're working and you're earning $10 a week, you need a lot of your family members to be working to be able to afford rent. Um, you know, savings, I don't know how existent that was. My hunch is that a lot of the savings were used to send back home or to buy tickets for people back home. Um,
That's why they had so many people. That's why they had so many people in the apartment.
yes, yes, everyone was saving money. Everyone was trying to earn money both to better their own life
Mhm,
and to help others come over, right? I mean,
mhm.
you know, Ike had to work to earn the money to get everyone over. Of course, he was interrupted by World War One, so they would have been over much sooner had war not broken out. And advancement covers everything. Like, you want to go to a movie, you want to pay your dues to, wherever just everything. So not a lot of wiggle room. This was my favorite thing, and I got sucked into it. This is from 1920. It's
Ah,
Healthy Babies, a volume devoted to the health of the expectant mother and the care and welfare of the child. And like I said, it was published in 1920, and I spent way too much time in here. Like I found out what I needed to find out, and then I kept going because, you know, he's been mortified, but I'm going to say it anyway. My son, who's now an adult, was a late potty trainer. And when I read training the child to use the chamber for bowel movements maybe commenced as early as 2 months, I thought I did it all wrong. Like I should be in the 1920s. Um, but then I read about this very serious problem, the prevention of prominent ears. And I just thought that was hysterical. Like you really have to take care. If it's really bad, you can, use tiny strips of adhesive plaster to hold them back. And worst case scenario, they can get an operation. Like I had no idea this was such a serious problem.
my nephew had that operation to pin his ears back.
Really?
Yes, and they did. They stuck out.
My grandfather's ears stuck out, but that was just him. I mean, I never
Yeah.
really thought about it. And it wasn't something I think I encountered in any of the books I read, 22 years ago when I had a newborn. So, all right. Oops, where am I? There we go. Why are you being difficult on me? Oh, sorry, too first. Okay, so speakeasies. This was a really hard one for me because, you know, I always start with Google to find the books I want, to find the articles to search for, to find the experts to talk to. I'm not afraid to pick up a phone and or send an email and say, "Hey, can we talk about this?" But when you look up speakeasies, you get modern day speakeasies. Like that has become such a hipster thing. There are speakeasies everywhere. And of course, they're not really speakeasies because they're legal. Um, but then I found the New Yorker, and they actually have a column called had a column called Speakeasy Nights. So the New Yorker started in 1925, and this was just amazing. Um, it how are you doing this? Sorry. Um, Every column had two reviews in it, and I borrowed liberally. The Cellar Speakeasy, where she goes to first with Duke. Um, it's run by the O'Gallaghers, just like I said. It talks about the machine for salted nuts and the pool table and the photo of Theodore Roosevelt. Um, because while I certainly could have made it up, if I have that available, I just love having it be the way it was. Um, and that was very exciting for me to find this. This is the upstairs speakeasy where I think Duke orders the Planter's Punch, Louis's favorite Planter's Punch made with Gold Bar Jamaica rum, which apparently doesn't exist anymore. And again, I had to send this to my copy editor and say it may not be available today, but the New Yorker said it was available, and that's good enough for me. So. This is Lewis. I did change the name to A. Samuels, which may or may not be my husband's first initial and middle name. Um, I do love when I know people and being able to stick their names in the novel. There's a neighbor, Mrs. Shoecat, who's like kind of a nasty woman, and Tina Shoecat is one of my oldest friends from high school. So I always tell people you may be in the novel, but it may not be, you know, the nicest. So I was able to do this. They also had in the New Yorker the prices of booze.
Mhm.
I just like, it's the prices that were going with the bootleggers of the day. And I just thought that was hysterical. Um, you know, the prices quoted are subject to change without notice and so it cannot be guaranteed uh, against coastal border and local enforcement conditions, right? So this long one was for the holidays, but normally it was just a little thing so you could see how much it was. I found a menu from 1927, December, 1928 that had prices on it because I wanted it to be accurate. I happened to have a friend or an acquaintance, the father of a elementary school friend of my son who runs a bar. And so I called him and I said, how much liquor would she need to have on hand? Like, what do what do you order? Because you need to find these things and they're all sorts of places. All right. Now we have the question of Jews and prohibition. What's a nice Jewish boy like you doing in a place like this? Now, um, Jews and prohibition went together like, I don't know, Jews and prohibition. So wine could be legally purchased for sacramental use, right? It was Passover. Your rabbi could get wine for you. On the left is a photo of some Jewish men with a still. Um, this was, it wasn't just Jewish people. Priests could get them. The I wish I knew more about other religions, but if you were in the religious business, you could get it, which is why Minnie goes to Leo and says, "Hey." And is that far-fetched? Well, not really, because this article is about folks who got in trouble because many Orthodox Jews bear non-Jewish names, and they were basically selling to anybody who would pay for the booze. You had some interesting names in there. So the shadier side of the resale business, it existed. That was real. People did all sorts of things to get alcohol legally. You could get alcohol from your doctor, but it was in such small amounts, it really wasn't worth much. Um, And then we have the gangsters. So most of the gangsters in the novel are fictional, but Arnold Rothstein and Meyer Lansky, as you probably all know, were real folks. Um, Arnold Rothstein, we'll go to Arnold first. So Arnold Rothstein was born in 1882, and he was probably someone you've heard of, even if you hadn't thought you heard of him. If you've read The Great Gatsby, the
Mhm.
character of Meyer Wolfsheim is based on Arnold Rothstein. Damon Runyon had many short stories about the brain. The brain was Arnold Rothstein. Um, the thing he is probably the best known for, and it has never been proven, this is all allegedly, but the Black Sox. If you recall, the
Yep.
Chicago Black Sox through the World Series, the White Sox, and Arnold Rothstein was named as the person who did this. So um, he was a big muckety muck in the Jewish gangster world. And even though he didn't drink or smoke, he saw the possibilities of prohibition probably faster than most. And he knew it was going to be good for him. And he got into the bootlegging business very quickly. They ramped up right up to speed. And then you go to Meyer Lansky. So Meyer pretty much took over for Arnold Rothstein after he was shot. As you see in the novel, the front page and then it sort of disappears. I went through the New York Times to figure out, what people knew and what people didn't know. Um, Meyer Lansky is probably best known for his gambling empire. He had casinos he was involved in. all over the country and in Cuba.
Mm.
Um, so he was born in 1902 in Grodno, which is Belarus now, but he always said he came from Poland because, everything was shifting. He arrived to the US in 1911 and early on became friends with Bugsy Siegel, who was another man who made his fortune in gambling. Um, Basically, the Italians and the Irish were harassing the Jewish kids for money, and they formed their own gang to fight back. Meyer Lansky became very, very good friends with Charlie Lucky Luciano. And the reason they became friends is that Luciano hit him up for money, and
Mm.
Lansky stood up to him, and Luciano really admired that. He thought that was great. So he took him under his wing and they went together, and it was the two of them that really brought together the Italian and Jewish mafias. Now, Lansky and Rothstein met at a bar mitzvah, at the bar mitzvah of a son of a mutual friend in Brooklyn. And Rothstein saw the potential in Lansky. He was hungry, he wanted more. So he went to work with Lansky. Um, he had Lansky got a garage, a truck and car rental and garage, because what a better way to bring in trucks of booze to a place where you're supposed to have trucks. Um, Lansky himself was also the model for a number of things. If anybody has seen Godfather 2, the character of Hyman Roth was based on Lansky. It was played by Lee Strasberg. And some of the quotes that Roth says are ones that have been attributed in slightly different ways to Lansky. I think Lansky said we're bigger than Standard Oil, and Hyman Roth says we're bigger than General Electric. I don't know exactly what it was. Um, and I will say that Lee Strasberg got a phone call one day um, from Meyer Lansky giving him his compliments. He did a good job. And he said, couldn't you have made me a little more sympathetic? So he knew about that. He approved of it, or at least whatever. And so Lansky was a really complex figure because he was a gangster and he was, not a good guy. But when the German American Bund, the Nazis in the United States started acting, gathering and gaining momentum, he was told by someone in the government that this was happening. And Lansky said, "All right." So Lansky got together groups of his men, and they went and broke up as many rallies as they could. And in fact, the person who had told him about this said, let us give you a salary for this. And he said,
Mm.
no, I'm a Jew and I feel for the Jews in Europe who are suffering. They are my brothers.
Mm.
He also was very involved in Israel. When Israel was declared a state, and of course everyone then attacked, there was an embargo on weapons being sent to the Middle East. But, Egypt kept getting around it. And so a member of the Haganah came to Lansky, and Lansky had all of the contacts. So he spoke to his friends on the waterfront. And it was sort of strange because mysteriously all of these weapons fell off the boats bound for Egypt. And somehow the ones for Israel, they got some really nice weapons sent. Um, they were mistakenly loaded onto the boat for Israel. So Lansky really wanted to make Aliyah. He wanted to retire in Israel. But when he got there, he was very controversial, and he was actually the one that the High Court went to session and debated it and determined that because of his criminal past, they would not allow him to become a citizen. So that sort of is the one that put that into place. Like,
Mm.
you can't go committing murder somewhere and then try to be a citizen in Israel. He actually retired in Miami Beach, um, and he lived out his life there. He died in 1983. And nobody wants to end on, gangsters. So let's talk about the fun stuff, the cocktails. So Minnie buys two books in the novel, and they are real books. There's Giggle Water. I found a website online that has full scans of um, cocktail books from the late 1800s to like the 1950s, 1960s. And I spent a lot of time reading them. Um, so Jimmy's is one that she bought, and I actually bought this book. I got one off of eBay just because I was like, how could I not? Um, and my husband took on the role of bartender, and we definitely experimented with a lot of the drinks. We did make some of them mocktails because I didn't want to have only cocktails. Um, but we did that, and that was very fun. So yeah, so that's what we did. And I just had a great time. And let me unshare my screen. I think that was about the time frame Vanessa had said.
Yes.
So I am now available if you guys have questions.
Uh, well, if you can raise your hand. Oh, Sue, go
Susan
ahead. I'm
raised
going to
her hand.
unmute you.
Okay, thanks. Well, it sounds to me like it must have taken you forever to write this book because I mean, I admire all the research you did, which I don't know if most authors go to the kind of trouble that you went through. But after I say that, my question is, why? My family also emigrated from Europe. My father was born in 1906 and was brought here as a child in 1912. Nowhere would my family have
Oh, no.
ever anything illegal to make money. And where did you get that from? Because I found that part of the story very interesting, but also very bothersome.
So,
Why on earth did they have to be so dishonest for the sake
so
of
you
the
have the
almighty dollar?
yeah, you have the example of Arnold Rothstein and Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel. So there were definitely people who were involved. One of the things I really researched was what was life like when you got to the United States? It was a brutal, brutal journey, right?
Yes.
I read reports by undercover investigators riding steerage on boats over. Once you got to Ellis Island, the slightest issue could have you sent back home. Um, People were trying to steal things from you, like in such a way of like, oh, you need to buy these right now because you need them for your trip because you can believe us, we're Americans and we know what we're talking about. And then once you got here, the living situation was not great. You had a lot of people living in pretty nasty apartments. The first tenement laws from the late 1800s said you have to have a window in the apartment. So people cut out internal windows. So you'd have a window from your front room to your bedroom. And then they said, well, the window has to be a source of light and air. So they built air shafts. And the air shafts were terrible because people would throw trash down there.
Yeah.
You could hear sounds. Um, God forbid there was a fire, it could go straight up. Um, and then the jobs were not great jobs, right? Factory work, seamstress work. And I think that you know, for a lot of people trying to save up money, you know, this was really hard. So I kind of feel like when Ike had the opportunity, he said, let me make some money. Let me get my family here. Let me give us a better life. Um,
But then he got his whole family into it. And
well, he got his
his
daughter,
daughter,
Just
right?
his daughter, just Minnie. The
just
son
Minnie,
said,
right.
that's not for me.
And I think that Minnie wanted it, right? Minnie looked up
Yeah.
to her father, and what were, her own prospects were pretty bleak. Like she could get married and then sort of live the same old life. She could become a secretary, and I mean that harassment was so real. Like, I mean,
So that's And Andy, we're going to get to you, but the harassment she had as a secretary is like, oh my God, things haven't changed.
Right.
And I thought that was, I just never thought about it in those time periods and the power that those men had over the women. Did you
Absolutely.
read about it? How did you find out about that?
I did a lot of reading about it. And, the New Yorker would always have comments and articles about, people dating. I mean, like the men chasing the women around and, you know, your skirt's too short, your shirt's too low, it's your own fault. And yeah, and then there were a lot of jobs that simply weren't open to her, right? As a Jewish woman, she couldn't do a lot of things as a woman, and she couldn't do a lot of things as a Jewish woman.
No.
Um, and working at her father's bar was fun, right? It was fun. It was like, I mean, the first time she did there, someone left her a dime. Like, what's that? Like
That was a lot.
it was tempting. It was very tempting. And so, of course, most immigrants were worked hard and kept on the straight and narrow, but the Jewish mafia was a thing. The
Mhm.
understick, the kosher nostra, I think they called it sometimes. So
Mhm.
I hope that answers your question, Susan.
Mm. Andy.
I thought the book was terrific. It was masterfully written. I've read it in 3 different book groups now. It's that
Wow.
it's that popular. And I believe it was this book group, and correct me if I'm wrong, Vanessa, is we wondered, is there going to be a sequel? What happens to Ike?
Yeah.
Because he's sort of left, he's still in jail. And then
Mhm.
the second question I had was there anyone in your life or that you knew of who was sort of an inspiration for Minnie, the character Minnie?
So, um, going to the first one, there will not be a sequel because, I feel like Minnie ended in a good place. We ended at the end of Prohibition. She's a nice boy. She and her brother are doing well. And what happens to Ike? I mean, most likely he'll be deported. When he gets out. I mean, even I'm sure nobody watches this, but like in the Real Housewives of New Jersey, there was the husband who went to jail and he was deported back to Italy because he wasn't a citizen. And,
Mm.
so he was gone. So I can imagine what it would have been like for a Jewish man in the 1930s getting out of jail, especially during the Depression. They don't need more people, to take care of. And as for Minnie, it was really important to me. I like strong women. I really like strong women, but I also wanted her to be flawed because, I've had people say to me, like, why would she do that? It was so stupid. And I said, yeah, but she was 19. And when I was 19, I did so many stupid things, right? Like, you just don't know better. My daughter is 20 and I'm watching her and I have to bite back because I'm like, you have to learn. You have to learn yourself. And just sort of the more I was writing about her, um, and the more I was like reading about, some of the tougher women of the time, that's what did it. Uh, I will say there is one thing that was stolen from real life. Um, Max Max tells Minnie that he makes deliveries with a violin case. And my husband's great uncle Maish in Chelsea, Massachusetts, used to do liquor deliveries with a violin case because he said no one stops a kid with a violin case.
Mm.
So that came from real life. I mean, I picked up little things from here, from there, but Minnie grew as the story went. So
I know this is a side character, but I thought that Sylvie, was kind of superfluous and cute and funny, but at the end, she steps up in such a big way, and not knowing it's the Volstead Act, not knowing about that, it all starts to make sense. How did you? Because there was a lot of good twists and turns.
thank you. I really wanted, Minnie to have a strong friend. And just because Sylvia was a little flighty when it came to men and a little here and there. She really did love Minnie. Like, I mean, their friendship was a real friendship, and that was very, very important to me. There's a writer, a cartoonist, Alison Bechdel, who she had a column, a cartoon comic, Dykes to Watch Out For, and she came up with this thing. She calls it the Bechdel test, or maybe other people called that, which is you have to have two women talking to each other, not about men. And it's something I really think about because, I always had friends that I was very political at a very young age, and we'd argue that. And so I always want to make sure that my characters are the same way. My grandparents were very political, and they would often talk about it. And I thought Sylvia was a great foil because she's like
Mhm.
so American
Yep.
and, is willing to embrace life in a way that Faggy would never have allowed Minnie to do.
Yeah.
But she was a good person. She was a good friend, and I think like we all have good people, good friends like that.
Paula.
Jennifer, I'd like to tell you how much I admire your description of what it took to become a citizen in this country,
Mm-hmm.
because I think we take this so much for granted, especially now.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how many of us would go through these hurdles to achieve this with all the obstacles that are being thrown in people's way. And it really was a very good refresher, of course, of our history here. And you did a beautiful job of describing that. Thank you.
And history, unfortunately, is repeating itself.
Mm-hmm.
The Trump has just made a more difficult citizenship test. And, so many of the restrictions placed on us in the 1920s, the Johnson-Reed Act, passed in 1924. And first of all, if you were Asian, forget it. Asians were not allowed in the country, not happening. But they made it a law that only 10% of the population of any given community from 1890 could come. So this meant that if you were desirable, if you were from Britain or Scandinavia, there were lots of people here in 1890 and you could totally come in. But if you were undesirable, meaning the Italians and the Jews, there were very few in 1890. And so it was only 10,000 allowed in. 10,000 Jews were allowed in after 1924. So, people tried to get in. My own great grandfather, I found his naturalization records, and he was actually denied the first time because his witness didn't show up. And he had to go back and for years and I really was thinking about that, like that would be like just devastating. And the little booklet I showed you, it's falling apart, otherwise I'd pull it out, but it said like this is something essential to get right, and if you don't get it right, you're gonna have to do it again. So it's upsetting to me that we have this cycle, where
Yeah.
I mean, I think we all know history repeats itself, but my first novel was about unwanted pregnancy in the 1930s, and hey, you know, things are going back to their night now. So I definitely am interested in issues that are still hot topics.
So glad that we all read this because I would like you to talk about how did you find out about the wine that killed Duke? That was, and of course, by then we were rooting against him. I think at the beginning he was kind of a debonair guy. People can chime in what they thought about Duke, but how did you come up with that? And did how did you think Minnie would feel about, using that trick on him?
Well, I don't think she would have ever thought about using that trick on him. I think that, in fact, I really struggled with this for a while because at first I thought, even if Duke threatened Max, she would not do that, right? Because Max is an adult, she could talk to him, he could take care of himself. And I thought, what would push her? And I realized that her sisters would be the one, like you know, I think we all say like we would kill for our children, but when it came down to it, we might actually, right? Like if my
Yeah.
child's life were at stake, I
Yeah.
would do whatever it took to save them. Um, it was well known that there was poisonous booze, and I actually, the New York Times on December 26, 1926, reported in New York, 23 deaths occurred because of holiday drinking, and 89 more were hospitalized from it. And then on December 30th, just a few days later, the headline on the front page read, Government to double alcohol poison content and also add benzene. Um, Government was, I mean, one of the senators was like, this is legalized murder, right? Because the government just kept putting in more poison, hoping it would stop people from drinking,
Mhm.
but it didn't.
Mhm.
And, if you were rich, you could get the best stuff, right? You could get the stuff straight from Britain or the Bahamas. But most people couldn't afford that kind of alcohol. So the bootleggers would get like maybe one bottle of the real stuff and then make like, six bottles by diluting it with the industrial alcohol. And, they tried different things to get rid of the poisons, but it didn't work necessarily. Um, so the poisoning was absolutely common, right? Absolutely common. And so um, I knew that, there was a good chance that Minnie would get it. And then I thought, oh, trust no one, keep that bottle. So it took me a little while to come around to like what would be her motivation for doing that.
Yeah.
And
Which
I was,
which brings up the sisters, and I know that that happened. I've read lots of books with orphans, the orphan train. But how did you get to that scenario? And it was so heartbreaking, just
well,
heartbreaking.
I knew,
Well, when Faggy died, I mean, and she keeps having children. I mean, that whole thing was it was hard to read.
yeah. And I think that, some women today, back then, want really big families, right? Like some women are passionate about having babies and growing the family. Um, I always joke, like, I'm not a baby person, like I'm a toddler person, and I had a friend who was a baby person, and I said, couldn't there be like child sharing? Like you could keep people too, and then I'll take them. Um, but there are plenty of people who just want big families. And Faggy was religious, right?
Mhm.
This is what was intended for me. This is what,
Mhm.
so that was definitely difficult to do, but I think it, especially given that she'd had problems with the earlier birth. And at this point she's older. I mean, you
Yeah.
know, 30s in the 30s today, it's not considered old.
Yeah.
But in those days, when you're having kids in your mid 30s,
It's
you know,
You're
late.
old.
it's late, but people did it. I mean, people had kids, 10 kids, every other year all the way up.
Yeah.
Um, and then for the kids, I just, I did a lot of research on the Hebrew Orphan Asylum on the
Mhm.
Upper West Side of New York, but I couldn't see Minnie putting the kids in an orphanage. I think that would have just been like, as hard as it was to give them to a family, to a couple, at least she knew they'd be taken care of.
Yeah.
And I read very, very mixed things about the Hebrew Orphan Asylum, and it seems to depend on who you were and what year you were there. Some people, it was really great. For others, it was torture and misery and abusive.
Yes.
So I just felt like, she realized like she couldn't take care of the children in the way her mother would have wanted, or she really couldn't take care of them at all.
Yeah.
And the rabbi understood, and people want what's best for the children. It's
Mhm.
no matter how hard it is. So that's something I was really thinking about. Like,
Mhm.
you do what you can to save them.
I'm the professional in the synagogue. I thought that the rabbi was portrayed very sympathetically. And, sometimes y- authors take the opportunity to make the rabbi, not so sympathetic, but I really appreciated everything he did for them and how sympathetic he was and how he was trying to, you know, take a hold of his community and help.
That was really important to me because so I did a lot of research on religion, Jewish religion in the United States at that time. And it was very, very hard, right? Most Jews wanted to keep the Sabbath. There was a section called the free thinkers. There were definitely free thinkers, and that's what I think Ike was. Ike gets here, he sees how things are working, he sees there's no gold on the street, and he's like, he goes the other direction. But so many people came, and if you had your own store, you could close on Shabbat. However, even then, if you closed on Shabbat and opened on Sunday, you could be summoned and fined for breaking the blue laws, right? Because it was illegal in New York to be open on Sunday.
Mhm.
And most people couldn't afford to be closed 2 days out of the week. And if you worked for someone else, of course, your schedule was dictated by them. And there were families where you would have like a very religious man working on Shabbat so his wife and children don't have to, right? Or children who are working on Shabbat so their parents don't have to. And it doesn't mean they're less religious, right? They still have the same beliefs, but they can't make it work, right? You can't survive here. And so for me, I like the idea of Ike being like some of the Jewish people out there. I read a lot of Bintel Brief from the Forward, which is like their Dear Abby column that Abraham Kahan, and there
It's
was
a great book. We have
and
it in
it's
our library.
fantastic. But there were a lot of talks about like I'm a free thinker, but my family isn't, and how do I do this or that? And so I wanted uh, Ike to be skeptical and Faggy to be, you know, very passionate about, her religion, her community, because it was a good way for me to show Minnie that Ike's not always right. I can be wrong, like, because she really idolized him,
Yeah.
but Faggy was right. The rabbi was a really good guy, and
Yeah.
Leo was a really good guy.
I also appreciate that you didn't have Ellis Island change their names, but their names are changed at home because that's what
Never
happened.
happened. Yeah, no, it never happened that way. My great grandfather on my other side, Max Broslovsky, he was working in a car in Detroit, in a whatever automobile plant, and he could speak Russian, Yiddish, and English.
Mm.
And so the union boss said, "You're really useful, but your name doesn't work." And he said, "Okay, so what should I be called?" And he said, "Brown. How about Brown?" So that's how we became Browns. It
Yeah.
happened at schools. It happened. I had one of my great grandparents was also a Brown because she came over and her name was Daragoy, but she had family here who had already changed their name to Brown. So she went to Brown.
Right.
Yeah, no, nobody, that is something I'm very passionate about. There was one case of a name being changed at Ellis Island, and that was a woman who came over pretending to be a man. And
Oh,
when she got to Ellis Island, she was found out. They still let her in, but they put down a female name.
yeah. That makes sense. Yeah.
I
Susan, go ahead.
I have a name story to go along with yours because when my father's family came, they didn't come to Ellis Island. They went to Baltimore. That's where they came in. And there, we had a long time to figure out what the name had. My maiden name is Pollack, Pollack.
Mhm.
And my father had first cousins, Pollock, and then he had first cousins whose last name was Postel, Postel. And we finally found out that the name was originally Postelovsky.
Mm.
But my family didn't change the name. It was changed for them in Baltimore because nobody could understand what they were saying.
Yeah.
And that is another possibility because the Ellis Island copied the name that was on the manifest. And if you said your name and it got, transliterated into whatever they heard,
Right.
so it could have been different. And, like my family, the Krasnosteins, who you guys met a little earlier, most of them became Steins. One of them became Karens. People would change it depending on where they
Right.
were, what they wanted. And some remained Krasnostein. And there are other people who were, it was actually Krasnostein, that's all over the place.
Yeah. Thanks.
Can you share with us what you're working on for next?
I am. I'm actually very far into my manuscript.
Ooh.
So I grew up mostly in South Florida. I went to high school in Miami Beach. And two things a lot of people don't realize about Miami Beach. One is it's man-made. And two, that before World War II, it was restricted and no Jews were allowed to live above Fifth Street. You couldn't buy, you couldn't sell, you couldn't, not allowed. There were a couple of exceptions made for very, very wealthy Jews, Bernard Gimbel, Julius Fleischman, but for the most part. So my story is about a Jewish woman who moves to Florida and wants to build on Miami Beach. So she has to pretend she's not Jewish.
What's the date? What's the time period?
1911 to 1927.
Oh, sign me up for that.
Well, hopefully I've got to finish it and it's got to sell. It's
Okay,
the
okay.
publishing world is a little challenging right now.
I can't even imagine. I just, and I know a lot of people self-publish and so on and so forth, but Jennifer and I were talking about, the plethora of Holocaust books. And so to find something from a different time period, and I think everyone here knows our rabbi, Ike Serrata, is from Miami Beach. So he's going to be he and his family will be interested in it as well. So we're going to really look forward to that.
Yeah, we were talking about that. Growing up in Miami Beach, I read so many Holocaust novels, books, memoirs, everything. I mean, I just was obsessed to the point where it's not that I won't read them now, but they're not going to be my first choice by any means. And I really like writing earlier because I'm intrigued about the Jewish community without the shadow of the Holocaust.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't easy. There were pogroms and, discrimination. I mean, terrible things, but the Holocaust is something else. And
Right.
so, yeah.
Right. When you write after the Holocaust, you have to either just something, you have to
In
have
there
to
in
deal
some
with it.
way.
Yeah. All right, any other questions? Wow. Okay. We love the book before we talk to you. We love it even
Brenda,
more.
I can't tell if Brenda's waving because she has a question or.
Brenda, do you have a question? Wait. I'll unmute you.
Thank
Brenda,
you.
go ahead.
Okay, do you think that at some point in time you're going to do a sequel to because I'm dying to know, is Minnie ever going to marry Leo, and what happens to the two sisters?
The two sisters will never know about because they are now a separate family. But no,
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to do a sequel. I think that I like where it ends up, and I
Mhm.
like being able to imagine like what happens next.
Okay.
So, but yeah, and besides, I want to move on to my new characters, my character of Sophia, who's in my next novel.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we want to hear about Sophia. We thank you for this evening.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thank
Thank
you
and
for
we're passing
talking.
on. It
was-
was a great book.
Great
and
book.
Thank you. It was a wonderful book, and this was a good presentation.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank
Yeah.
you. All right.
Thank you
I'll
so
see
much.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Early Shabbat Shalom.
Bye.
Bye-bye.